I don't think I can hear you all.
Good afternoon. This is Connie Mendel. I guess we will call the Louisville and Jefferson County Hazardous Materials Ordinance Board meeting to order. It is 2 p.m., January 22nd. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to do a quick round of introductions. And then please share organization or if you're a member of an agency or a representative of the public. So I'll begin. Connie Mendel. I serve as Chief Health Strategist for Louisville Metro Public Health and Wellness, and also currently Chair of the board. So I got next on my screen, I have Chief Myman.
Jason Myman, Pleasure Ridge Park Fire Protection District.
Okay. Next person on my screen is Bobby Cooper.
Bobby Cooper, Louisville Fire Department. I'm the Executive Assistant Chief. This is my first meeting. I apologize for the confusion. I am dialing in from Louisville Metro Police Department Training Academy in a class all week.
Well, welcome. Welcome to the committee. The next person I have on my screen is Lori Carson.
Hi, Lori Carson, Director of Safety, Health, and Environment for Xeon Chemicals. I'm a member of the industry representative.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jennifer Cave.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Cave. I am an environmental attorney in Louisville at the law firm of Stites and Harbison, and I'm pleased to be here today to represent Eckert America Louisville.
Thank you. Anita McGowan.
Hi, my name is Anita McGlawn. I'm the plant manager of Eckert America Louisville facility.
Okay. Thank you. Sarah Schaefer.
Hi, I'm Sarah Schaefer, and I'm corporate representative of Eckert America Corporation.
Thank you. Adrian Niehoff.
Adrian Niehoff, Industrial Programs Manager for the Metropolitan Sewer District.
Thank you. Robert Rose. I know Robert assists us, is part of MSD and assists us with coordinating all of our meetings. I'll skip on to my next screen. Andy Reynolds.
Yeah, Andy Reynolds, Government Affairs Manager for Waste Management.
Kelly Watson.
Good afternoon. I am the General Counsel and Legal Director for Louisville MSD, and I'll be kind of staffing you all today.
Thank you for joining us. And I do want to say in the chat, Robert popped up that he is the Industrial Programs Coordinator for MSD. Thank you. Have I left anyone off?
Yeah, this is Amanda Hahn from Michelin ASRC.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
And I'm Corinne Greenberg. I'm the HMO Board Vice Chair, but today I'm recusing myself from the appeal at hand as I'm also the EHS Manager for Eckert America Louisville.
And co-chair or vice chair for the organization. So again, sorry about that, Corinne. My screen I'm only seeing so many people at a time. Anyone else I left off? Okay, thank you. Going to the agenda. The next item on our agenda is public speakers. Robert or Adrian from MSD, do we have any public speakers?
Connie, not that I'm aware, but we also have Mike Moore on this meeting as well as Jackie Quarles. I'm not sure why they are not showing up on the screen. let me make a phone call. I don't know if they're on the correct one or what is going on.
They just put in the chat, if you notice that Robert just said that they have Mike Moore, Jackie Qualls, and Suna Moran waiting to join.
Oh,
So I guess we're waiting on them to join. Yes.
Do you see them on the Zoom waiting to be let in? Okay.
I do not. I think that's Robert, or you usually invite people in?
They are here, it looks like. I see them on my screen.
Okay.
I just talked to Mike Moore. He will be on here in just a moment, Connie.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. So at this time, we have no public speakers. Hearing none, we'll move on to meeting minutes approval. All of the board members should have received a copy of the July 31st, 2025 meeting minutes. Hopefully you've had ample time to review those. Does anyone have any revisions or changes that need to be made?
Motion to approve.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor signifying by a thumbs up or a yes. Anyone opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Moving on to chair report. I don't have any specific reports to share today. I appreciated last July. Appreciative of MSD and your staff and sharing with us a report of the incidents from the previous year. We look forward to additional reporting out, particularly any trends or anything we can do as a community as far as hazardous material prevention. To that, we go into old business. Is there any old business to discuss, Mike?
No, I'm sorry.
Brevity at its finest. Okay. Well, that actually moves us into new business, where we are stated to hear a notice of violation appeal.
Yes, for your new business, you have a notice of violation from ECHR for their appeal. What will happen next is that each side will have 15 minutes to do a presentation. Following each individual presentation, the board members may have asked questions. After both presentations and the questions have been asked, the board will go into closed session and have deliberation regarding the information that they just heard. Following closed session, they will come out and they will be able to announce any recommendations that have been made that were discussed during that deliberation. And then following that, I think that is the last end of your new business that is on your agenda. I will be attending closed session with the board only to advise on process, and nothing of substance will be discussed by me. So I believe Eckert will go first with their presentation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Jennifer Cave. I'm an attorney at Stites and Harbison here in Louisville, and I am outside counsel for Eckert, and I'm pleased to join your HMO board meeting this afternoon. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. All right. Hopefully you guys can all see the slideshow presentation. All right. So we're here today to.
Do you want to maximize it? Or at least minimize the.
Is it showing the next slide?
Yeah, we're still looking at your screen version. You're only.
You're looking at this.
Yeah, you're only projecting up there.
Oh.
So we're looking
Maybe
at
I
your
should
little
just
thumbnails on the
maybe I
side.
should just undo this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Try it again.
I need to stop sharing.
No, I think you need to go into presentation mode at the bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. All right. I think this is better. Sorry about that. We've had some technical difficulties here today. The older I get, the lesser my IT abilities appear to become. So I apologize for that. So we're here today to talk about an event that occurred, a process event that occurred at Eckert America Louisville's facility on February 25th of 2025. And it is Eckert's position that this process event did not trigger any requirement to immediately report the event to 911 under the Hazardous Materials Ordinance. As a result, Eckert respectfully requests that the HMO Appeals and Overseers Board advise MSD to withdraw the notice of violation that it issued for this process event. Quickly, just a little bit of information about Eckert. Eckert is the oldest of the 10 Rubbertown chemical manufacturing facilities. It was built in 1929 as Reynolds Metals Plant Number 3. It was acquired by Eckert America in 1998. It manufactures pigments and is a member of the Altana Group, which is a German chemical manufacturing corporation founded in 1873. The facility makes aluminum powder by melting aluminum ingots in a hot melt furnace and then atomizing the molten aluminum in an updraft column. And some of that aluminum powder is then mixed with mineral spirits on site to create an aluminum paste, which is a pigment used in inks, paints, and other coatings. And the plant currently employs 72 individuals. Now moving on to the event on February 25th, 2025, at approximately 2:50 a.m., the discharge diaphragm pump on a piece of equipment called the mill number 8 failed, and that resulted in an overflow of slurry from the mill. Slurry is primarily a mixture of D60 mineral spirits and aluminum powder. The D60 is a mineral spirit blend that is formulated to have a flash point of greater than 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Approximately 150 gallons of slurry was lost from the mill in total. Approximately 140 gallons of slurry were contained inside of the plant within the mill 8 room secondary containment curbing, and approximately 10 gallons of slurry was contained on top of the water in a concrete lined cooling tower sump. As a result of Eckert determining that the slurry that was lost from the mill was fully contained, Eckert determined it was not subject to any applicable reporting requirements. The next slide here is a schematic of the mill 8 process. Mill number 8, its screening tanks and its screeners are all located inside the mill number 8 room inside the building at Eckert's facility. So everything that's within the green box is located inside the mill number 8 room. The mill number 8 room is equipped with secondary containment consisting of containment curbing at the entrance to the room, as well as solvent-resistant sealant between the cinder block walls and the concrete floor of the interior walls. This secondary containment curbing and the solvent-resistant sealant were designed to contain losses of mineral spirits or slurry from the equipment inside the room. Now for the process, D60 mineral spirits are piped into mill number 8 from the tank farm. Aluminum powder is the primary ingredient added to the mineral spirits in the mill. Mill number 8 is a batch process which mixes the mineral spirits and the aluminum powder to form a slurry. Following the complete mixing, the slurry exits the mill through the diaphragm pump and enters screening tanks before it undergoes additional processing. Additional mineral spirits are added to the slurry as the mill is discharging as a wash. In addition, non-contact cooling water recirculates between the mill number 8 jacket and the cooling tower when the mill is operating. On the date in question, which was February 25th, the diaphragm pump located between the mill and the screening tanks failed, resulting in the loss of approximately 140 gallons of slurry from the process equipment onto the concrete floor inside the mill 8 room and the mill 8 room secondary containment. In addition, approximately 10 gallons of slurry backed up through the mill and was lost from the process equipment into the non-contact cooling water catch tray. This slurry flowed with the non-contact cooling water into the concrete lined cooling water tower sump. Immediately following the slurry being the slurry exiting from the mill 8, Eckert began their response to the event. Approximately 140 gallons of the contained slurry was removed from inside the mill 8 room, from inside the secondary containment system, and then approximately 10 gallons of contained slurry was removed from the surface of the cooling water inside the cooling water lined sump, inside the concrete lined cooling water tower sump, excuse me. All recovered material was disposed of according to applicable federal, state, and local requirements. And in addition, Eckert replaced the diaphragms in the pump that had the failure, and certain catch tank fill alarms settings were adjusted in order to decrease the likelihood of a similar event occurring in the future. MSD issued a preliminary response report, or PRR, requesting information about the process event. And in response to the PRR, Eckert submitted its response on March the 6th. And in its response, Eckert noticed that the slurry did not impact any soil, surface water, or MSD sewer conveyance. Eckert also noted that the slurry is classified as a Class 3A combustible liquid and is not flammable, and that slurry was fully contained and did not pose an imminent threat to health, safety, or welfare. Regardless, MSD issued a notice of violation to Eckert on April 10th, 2025. MSD's stated basis for issuance of the NOV was Eckert's failure to report a release to the environment, citing the Hazardous Material Ordinance Section 95.06A1. Concurrently, the response group involving MSD, EMA, Louisville Metro Public Health and Wellness, APCD, and other response agencies logged this event as a level 0 incident. Level 0 incidents are defined by the response group as incidents that may include small amounts of hazardous or non-hazardous materials. Level 1 incidents are incidents that are defined by the response group as those incidents involving a release or possible release of a known hazardous material. And then, of course, level 2 and level 3 incidents are defined as those that involve significant hazards. And again, here, this incident was logged as a level 0 incident by multiple Louisville Metro agencies. So the issue that we are asking the board to consider today is whether the February 25th process event at Eckerd triggered a requirement to report to 911 under the HMO. The HMO makes it clear that reporting is required if there are hazardous materials that are released to the environment or incidents that pose an imminent threat. And so the questions that are subject to consideration today are, is the aluminum slurry considered a hazardous material? Was the aluminum slurry released to the environment? And did the aluminum slurry pose an imminent threat? The slurry is considered a hazardous material. The slurry contains D60 mineral spirits, which is a petroleum distillate. And under MSD's definition of hazardous material, petroleum products are included in that definition. However, Eckerd believes that there was no release of hazardous material to the environment. And this is because all of the slurry was contained either within the secondary containment in the Mill 8 room or within the concrete-lined cooling tower sump. In addition, Eckerd believes that the slurry did not pose any imminent threat to human health or the environment. The slurry is a Class 3A combustible material. It is not flammable at room temperature as recognized by NFPA 30, NFPA 704, and NFPA 497. In addition, airborne concentrations of the material were deemed to be below acceptable exposure levels based on historical site-specific monitoring data. As a result, we believe that reporting was not required for this process event under the Hazardous Materials Ordinance. In summary, 911 reporting was not required under the HMO because no hazardous material was released to the environment, and the slurry posed no immediate threat to human health or the environment. And as a result, we're requesting that the NOV be withdrawn. Now, you would hope that that would be the end of the story, but there's a few more facts to consider here. And we've tried to summarize those briefly on the timeline on your screen. So again, on April 10th, 2025, MSD issued the NOV for failure to report a release to the environment under section 95.06A1 of the HMO, as we've discussed. And as we've already discussed, Eckerd's response to the PRR and the NOV was that there was no release to the environment because the materials were fully contained and because there was no imminent threat to human health or the environment. Eckerd asked MSD to reconsider its NOV. That request for reconsideration was denied on June the 11th. In denying Eckerd's request for reconsideration, MSD changed the basis for issuing the NOV to Eckerd. In the denial for the request for reconsideration, MSD cited section 95.18 of the HMO, stating that the release slurry constituted an immediate fire hazard and therefore reporting was required. In response to that request for reconsideration, and as previously discussed today, the slurry material is combustible. However, it is not flammable and thus it does not constitute an immediate fire hazard. Eckert again asked MSD to reconsider the issuance of the NOV. And on November 4th of 2025, MSD again denied Eckert's second request for reconsideration, and in doing so, again changed the basis for the issuance of the NOV. This time, instead of having the NOV rely on HMO Ordinance Section 95.06A1 relating to a release to the environment, or Section 95.18 relating to immediate fire hazards, MSD cited Section 95.18 again, but indicated that the release resulted in an imminent threat to welfare of individuals at the site. In responding to MSD's denial of its second request for reconsideration, Eckert provided site-specific exposure monitoring data that indicated that there was no imminent threat to the health, safety, or welfare of individuals at the site. So we are here today with this appeal, regardless of which basis that MSD has put forth for the NOV. We believe that they're all incorrect and that we are asking this board to evaluate the issuance of the NOV by MSD.
Thank you, Ms. Cave. That's been 15 minutes. Is this your last slide?
This is my last slide. So in conclusion, the HMO contains unambiguous definitions and criteria for what constitutes a hazardous materials incident. The process event in the mill room did not meet these criteria. There was no release to the environment, there was no immediate fire hazard, and there was no imminent threat to employees, public health, or the environment. As such, there's no remaining defensible basis for MSD's insistence on maintaining the NOV. Eckert appreciates the government's assistance when responding to releases of hazardous materials, but believes those precious resources should be reserved for true community emergencies, and that small, fully contained process events that do not pose any threats, such as this one, can and should be readily and safely addressed by trained and equipment facility employees. Eckert respectfully requests that the HMO Appeals and Overseers Board advise MSD to withdraw the notice of violation. Thank you. That concludes our presentation. I would like to note for the record Eckert's objection about being excluded from the closed session when MSD will have a representative in that session. I'd just like to note that for the record, please. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you. Now, do the board members have any questions for Eckert? We'll take those questions now. Feel free to come off of mute and
That's Chief Mime and PRP Fire. What is a level 0 incident?
Are you asking for the definition, Chief?
I've never heard of a level 0 incident. As Corinne, I see your hand up. I don't know if you're allowed to answer that or not, but
Am I allowed to answer?
Corinne is allowed to answer as a representative of the facility.
So on the MSD web.
Corinne, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Jennifer. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Where MSD maintains a log of all the incidents on the MSD website, as a footnote to that online workbook with all those incidents, it defines those levels. And so the definition that Jenny had in her presentation was taken directly from the footnote to the table maintained on MSD's website.
okay. So I would just like to note that in the hazmat ordinance, it specifically talks about level 1, 2, and 3. And PRP Fire does not recognize a level 0.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's what it says on their
I get
report.
that.
Yep.
I'm just saying that we as the first responders do not recognize a level 0 in our response criteria. So the next question I have is what air monitoring did Eckerd do immediately following the I guess immediately following when they found the release? What air monitoring was done specific to LEL, VOCs, and parts per million and stuff?
So Eckerd has access to historical air monitoring data for similar occurrences that have happened historically. That monitoring data is indicative of no threat to employee health and safety or community health and safety.
Okay. Do you have that history? The thing that I question is what were those ranges? Under certain conditions, this could be a flammable product, right? A spill in the wintertime is far different than a spill in the summertime, due to atmospheric conditions and how mineral spirits can release through vapor pressures a lot more vapors in the summertime versus the wintertime. So I'd be curious as to how you can determine or what made the determination that it was a safe area without doing that type of air monitoring initially. How can you go off of historic data and not report something based on historic data without doing any type of initial air monitoring? So I'd be curious to see what that air monitoring was done immediately. Was there ventilation being done in that room? The room was totally sealed up. So what was the ventilation that was being done in that room? And it goes back to the air monitor reading. So I'd be curious to see what the air monitoring readings were to be able to form that conclusion. I believe that's all the questions that I have as far as the relation to the spill, but was a site safety plan derived for cleanup, PPE levels, things like that. And then my final question is, what is the reportable quantity of this?
Okay, so I can answer the last one really quick.
Okay.
The HMO reportable quantity for a petroleum product is 56 gallons.
Okay.
But that would have to be released to the environment. To your questions about the flammability of the material, this D60 formulation, this mineral spirits blend, has a flash point of 147 Fahrenheit. So it would have to be heated above ambient room temperatures to get up to that ambient temperature. Unfortunately, regrettably, the individuals on scene the morning of February 25th did not do air monitoring of that event, but all the other monitoring of similar events that they had historically done, barely lifted off the VOC exposures in parts per million, and even less, they've never really registered anything in the LEL. The room is ventilated. It can be ventilated. The curbing covers the door thresholds. Even when the doors are open, it does have ventilation fans in there. So the employees were really confident that there was no combustible or flammable atmosphere, that there was no overexposure in the atmosphere, and hindsight being 2020, nothing happened as a result of the incident.
Where's the air monitoring sensors at in that room?
We have a handheld 5-gas meter that is taken out whenever needed. Regrettably, they didn't take it out in this event, but that's a non-conformance with company protocol. That's not a non-compliance with the HMO or any other regulation.
Okay.
And the historical air data was provided to MSD.
Yes.
MSD, do you all have that by any chance?
Excuse me, can you repeat that?
Do you have the historical atmospheric monitoring testing that was provided to you all from Eckerd?
We may have, but it's inconsequential in this case because whenever you have an incident, as you know, whenever you have an incident like that, you have to have actual air monitoring. You can't go on historical data because that's based on what? That's based on occupational exposure. You don't have if you have a spill of 150 gallons, or you have a spill of 1,500 gallons, the potential air in that room, the concentration of air in that room is going to be completely different. So you cannot use historical data for emergency response purposes. You can't do it under hazardous waste operations. That's something, Chief, you know, if you go into a atmosphere, you have to have air monitoring because you have to decide what PPE you're going to wear.
Correct. I'm not disagreeing with you. I just didn't know if it was actually provided to you. I believe.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying
Nice to see what it is.
that's, yeah.
And were there other incidents?
I would disagree with that because this D60 material is not a hazardous waste. It is not a hazardous substance under CERCLA or EPCRA or TSCA or the Federal Water Pollution Control Act or RCRA or any of that. It is only a hazardous material under the HMO because it is a petroleum product. I believe the air monitoring reference that Mike mentioned is out of the HAZWOPER standard, which would apply if it were a hazardous substance. Okay, so we do have those protocols, but in this case, when it was not a regulated hazardous substance under CERCLA or HAZWOPER, we go back to our site protocols that said they should have done monitoring. They didn't do monitoring because the employees on the scene felt that this was entirely consistent with other small spills that they had handled and cleaned up without incident.
But it wasn't an inconsequential spills. 150 gallons, and you only have 1,110 gallons of capacity to control a spill. Your people don't have that information specifically at hand. I think you had 8 people that work in the evening, and this happened at 2:50 in the morning. So those folks have to make a decision within 15 minutes. This has to be made within 15 minutes that
Yes.
that it is controlled, that you know what the atmosphere potentially is, that there wasn't any other potential exposure, that it didn't get into the cooling tower system, which it did, which is another issue. So we're talking about that within 15 minutes, because it's 15 minutes reporting from discovery. And based on all of those different conditions and the air and going outside and checking the area to make sure nothing escaped from the room, you have to report within 15 minutes.
Absolutely. And the site shift supervisor on scene went through all those questions in his head within the 15 minutes, and they determined that this was something they could they were equipped and trained to handle. It was fully contained in the room. They were able to get in and clean it up. It was not any more hazardous than other events that had been monitored. We had monitoring from previous events that were all below the STEL. These values are provided in the September 8th summary document that was shared with the board prior to the meeting. The short-term exposure limit for this material is 310 parts per million. The other recorded values for similar or even larger releases in similar or even smaller rooms were 89 parts per million, 145 parts per million, 252 parts per million. So they went through this all very quickly in 15 minutes. As to the part contained in the 10 gallons that got in the cooling tower, do you want to address that?
Well, I was just going to say, Chief, I have access to that data now, and as Corinne said, the NIOSH 15-minute ceiling short-term exposure level is 310 ppm. And Eckert provided data for 7 different release events. All of them had peak values. All 7 other similar peak events. I'm sorry, all 7 other similar events, some larger spills, some smaller spills, had peak readings below the STEL of 310 parts per million.
I appreciate the historical data. I guess my last question is, when was the amount calculated? How soon?
It would have been when they drummed it up.
Okay.
But they're pretty good at eyeballing the floor.
Okay. But you just told me that no other ordinance, no one recognizes that
Correct.
as a hazardous materials.
Correct.
Did I also hear you say that the only one that does recognize it as the hazardous materials is the hazmat ordinance?
Correct.
Okay, so if you spilt 150 gallons and the ordinance says 56, then I don't understand what the question is. I don't understand that if you know that it is classified as that, why was there a delay when you knew you had over 150 gallons?
I can answer that, Chief. So the hazardous materials ordinance requires the amount that's reported to actually be released to the environment. And there's a specific definition of the term release and a specific definition of the term to the environment in the hazardous materials ordinance. So we believe that this release was not reportable because it was not a release to the environment as those terms are defined under the HMO. So if you had a tank farm and there was a release from one of your tanks and that release was fully contained within a secondary containment system, that release would not require reporting under the HMO, even if you had 10 times the amount of product that was released above the reportable quantity.
Well,
That's
actually,
the
if it was
difference.
released to a secondary containment, if that secondary containment was an impounded surface, then it would be.
But if it was a built containment.
And what
We
about
have
the cracks?
reported those, but they were
What about the
outside.
cracks in the secondary containment wall? I'm not trying to be argumentative, okay?
No.
I'm just saying that anything that releases out of its primary containment is what I consider into the environment. Whether it's in a building, whether it's on grass, whether it's in a stream, whether it's anything. And I know you're getting ready to read to me the definition. I get that. But it's in a primary containment for a reason. And if it comes out of its primary containment into a secondary containment, it's still releasing something into the atmosphere or something into the environment. And that's my definition, right? You know, a bird can come and get into a secondary containment dike, as you so speak, and kill it. That's into the environment, right? You get VOCs on certain parts of the year. You know, mineral spirits in a secondary containment can be far worse in the summertime than it can in the wintertime, right? So if you say that it's not worthy to call 911 in February, how do you know it's not going to be worthy to call in July when it's 105 degrees outside? So I understand definitions, but I'm also understanding practicality and saying it was a reportable quantity by what Corinne said. It's a petroleum product. You know, I guess that's where my mind goes to. But again, we can talk about chemical characteristics all day long. But that's the last question I had.
Well, and I appreciate that. I would recommend that you review the definition of release and the definition of environment in section 95.03 of the ordinance. The MSD promulgated those rules for a reason, and that's what the regulated community has to abide by. And although your definition of the environment may be broader than the HMO's definition of the environment, what we're talking about today is the HMO's definition. And we need a clear, bright line rule for all the entities that are regulated by the HMO so that they can understand what their obligations are going forward. Eckert's certainly not opposed to reporting releases to 911 when they're required to do so under the HMO, but this release simply doesn't qualify under the definitions and under the terms of the HMO for immediate 911 reporting.
So the HMO also is very specific about the safety of workers. And without doing air monitoring, you cannot tell me that the safety of workers was taken into consideration.
Respectfully, Chief, we had data from 7 similar incidents, and all 7 of them indicate that worker safety was protected.
Does it talk about in those 7 incidents the time of year and the temperatures of those days?
I have the dates, and I don't have the temperature.
If anything, I mean, February
Again,
would have been the least volatilizing event because it would have been the coldest temperature. All the
that's
other,
my point.
it would have been
Yeah, I mean, there
more
were
readily.
2 in
That's
April.
my point.
Yeah, there
So
were
you
2 in
can't
April,
say-
one
you
in
can't say
July,
I'm
one
gonna-
in August, one in September, and 2 in December.
You
So
can't say
certainly
during the-
July, August, and September, the data would be indicative of worst case scenario.
In an emergency response, you can't say, well, I'm not going to call in February, but I have to call in July, is my point.
Respectfully, the shift supervisor on site, this is a material that they work with day in, day out, year round. You know, whether it's in the process equipment, in a drum, in a container, or in this case, some of it was on the floor, but it's the same material that they already know. We have all the routine IH monitoring data showing, out of numerous IH monitoring events, most were non-quantifiable. They couldn't even pick up measurable, quantifiable measurements. We've never had any data from any monitoring, either routine monitoring or emergency response monitoring, showing any data above an applicable exposure level. What we have is no data suggesting that it would have been above. And that's the basis that the shift supervisor would have relied upon in that 15-minute window, having to make a decision. There's no evidence to suggest that it would have been an unacceptable exposure.
And MSD has no evidence to suggest it would have been unacceptable exposure.
So Connie Bindle here. Question on the cooling tower and the sump. So you're saying that 10 gallons of the slurry did flow into the cooling tower system and sump. Are there any other processes or lines or products that flow into that same sump?
No.
So the only thing possible to go in the sump is this particular slurry?
Well, normal operation, it would just be recirculating non-contact cooling water.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the failure of the diaphragm pump, some of the slurry backed up through the mill and came into contact with that non-contact cooling water, and that's how it entered the sump.
And later that morning, the company did call a contractor on top to use a vac truck to just skim it off the top surface of the water. So it just floated as a thin layer on the top of the water until it was sucked out.
And the top is a kind of like a box, and it's got concrete on the bottom and concrete on the sides.
Yeah, it's basically a sump to hold the water that's going through the cooling tower. And the slurry would have just been a thin layer on top until it was sucked out later that morning.
What's the capacity of the sump?
Lots of water. When they did suck it out, they let it settle in the drum, and there was only 10 gallons of slurry from the sump. The rest of it was clear at that point.
Okay. But the slurry is not intended to go to the sump. Right? You're saying the sump is only intended for the recirculating non-contact cooling water. Is that correct?
Correct. The
So
slurry
are there? Go
is
ahead.
the product. So yes, our intention is to collect the product and not for it to go into the cooling water.
Okay. So are there other products that could also end up in the sump then that are not intended to be there?
No, there are no other products in the room.
Okay, so all the mixing is done in another area?
The aluminum paste is really just slurry and
Slurry is aluminum.
mineral spirits and powder. Yeah, it becomes a slurry. That's the only thing handled in those rooms.
Okay. But the slurry is not intended to be in the sump though, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. And then question as far as in the hazardous material ordinance under threatened release. So whenever a threatened release occurs, the party in charge or the responding agency upon discovery of such threatened release shall immediately cause notice of the existence of such threatened release, the circumstances of same, and the location thereof by calling 911. So was threatened release taken into consideration?
Where would it have been released from? It was a puddle on the floor in the middle of the room. The concrete line surface.
For example, if so much slurry had been released from the failed diaphragm pump that lots and lots of slurry continued to overflow from the mill, and the volume of that slurry allowed it to ooze over the secondary containment curbing at the entrance to the door, and then started to head outside of the building into the environment, that of course would constitute a threatened release.
I have a real world event, very similar scale. It was in a mill room, but this goes back to January of 2019. this particular spill happened from piping that was very, very near the exterior door of the room. And in that event, it was like raining down from the piping, hitting the floor. Most of it stayed in the room, but some of it bounced over the curb into the exterior sidewalk where there was a storm drain. That event was called into the regulatory authorities because of the threatened release to the storm drain. But
Well, I mean, to me, that's a release if it actually went outside of where it was supposed to be, not a threatened release.
that was called in. The company calls these releases in when we have a reportable release. Our position is that
Threatened release.
Yeah, or threatened release, but the February 25th incident didn't threaten anything. It was 140 gallons in the room, not going anywhere, not getting any bigger. The process had been shut off and they were just addressing it.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Eckhart or their representatives or outside counsel? Okay. Ms. Watson, I think you mentioned that MSD is supposed to give a 15-minute presentation.
Yes, MSD can now begin their presentation. They also have 15 minutes. And then the board members may ask questions of them following. MSD.
Yes, wait just a moment. I'm getting the
Okay.
getting everything set up here. Can you see that? Oh, you can't. Okay. Let me share. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, we cannot. Oh, it's coming up now.
Yeah, and this is how it's going to be presented. I'm sorry.
Proceed.
Okay. So first of all, just as a reminder, and I want to make this kind of clear, misstated, this is not an MSD ordinance. This hazardous materials ordinance is a Louisville Metro ordinance. We just administer the ordinance. In this case, I do want to reiterate the fact that the hazardous materials ordinance purpose and one of the definitions, the purpose of the HMO is for the protection of public health and safety and the workers, responders, et cetera, general public, through prevention and control of hazardous materials incidents and releases. And that's done a lot through our hazardous materials spill prevention control plans that are required to be sent in if you have reportable quantities of hazardous materials. And it includes things like emergency response operations, inventory, containment, and other information. And then it requires the timely reporting of releases, which is 15 minutes. And you think about it, I only have 15 minutes to give this, and I'm probably not going to get to the end of it. But in 15 minutes, what we're talking about is you have to be able to make all of these determinations. That's the air. Have we got everything shut off? Did it go to the environment? Was there all of these things? Is it safe? All of these things have to be determined by that person within 15 minutes. And if there's any concern that any of those things are a problem or an issue, 911 should be called immediately. Now, they talked about the definition of an indoor release, and it's an actual release of a hazardous materials indoors that poses an imminent threat to the health, safety, or welfare of individuals at the site of the incident. And in that case, you should call 911 immediately. So as we go down into the part of this is under penalties, really doesn't have anything here except to say that if there's any one thing that is out of, somebody didn't call 911 on time, they didn't follow their emergency response procedures as in their HMPC plan, they kind of get looped into one thing, but that's just a side. On February 25th at 2:50 a.m. and by their records that I could see, they have 8 people that work at 2:50 in the morning. They have to make a decision if they have a spill at what they're going to do, how many people do they have that can respond, etc. Eckert reported 140 gallons was released and approximately 10 gallons of slurry was released to the cooling tower system. That's a concern to us whenever that was how it was presented to us within the PRR. And it says which drains back to the cooling tower, and slurry was removed from the cooling tower, meaning that water got into the cooling tower is what was sent to us initially in the PRR, not just in the containment area. And the PRR states that all material was contained within the building or the cooling tower and was not discharged. The problem with that is, and I'll show you something here in a minute that gives us a bigger concern. And this is where it comes into a discussion. On their waste stream classification sheet, which is part of their pre-treatment program, they identify outfall 1, which is where all their processed water discharges to. But in addition to that, they include non-contact cooling water. In this case, they said this was non-contact cooling water. That's a non-categorical waste stream, which really only applies to federal regulations. So it doesn't really mean a whole lot in this context. But they also said the average daily flow was 2,450 gallons, that the flow is determined by a meter, which could be looked at, but it's one inch, 2 mechanical. Nothing to do with context here, except for on the permit that was discharged to us, sent to us for the waste stream classification sheet, it says that this discharge is continuous. Now you have a choice, you can do intermittent, you can put batch, but in this case, it was listed as continuous. My understanding is that it got into that container or into that sump. That sump, the water would go back into the non-contact cooling system. At some point, you have blowdown. That blowdown would go into another sump, which would be discharged to MSD. That makes it a point to where there could be contact and a discharge to MSD. There's a bunch of technical data, but one of the things they talked about, the flammability of the liquid and combustibility. There isn't a discussion about if it is or isn't. There is the 147 degree flash point is something that is addressed accordingly, but we can address that in a different way here shortly. They did include in the technical data and the information that they provided that the room was equipped with ventilation fans also. Those ventilation fans, when you start talking about that kind of information, there's some physical properties of this material that makes it difficult to assess whether those ventilation fans would work accurately during this type of a situation. Also, we're talking about the meal rooms are equipped with the containment berms. And in the data that they provide, it says that those containment that room will contain 1,110 gallons. That means that it would not escape based on what they provided in information within their waste stream, in their hazardous materials spill prevention and control plan. When we were talking about actual data that was collected, that is all based on certain conditions, on a certain size room in a certain area. Everything would have to be that your data would have to come from mill 8 with all of the same materials, same tanks, same amount of everything in that room to even look at a theoretical, look at the information that we had. But you can't look at just mill 8 and compare that to mill 9 or to any other room or any other area within that facility. The other thing about that is that anytime you're going to identify or you're going to really assess worker exposure, you have to have a meter in your hand, which is part of your emergency operations, which y'all didn't follow in the first place. So you didn't have that meter in your hand to assess the VOCs in that room. The LAL, again, should have been monitored based on your emergency operations plan, but it wasn't. So we had you in that discussion. You said that y'all sent us some data. You also did some calculations and provided that to us. Within the calculations, you just said that there was some data that you had, but theoretical calculations showed up at 435 ppm. That's a lot more than what y'all provided earlier. And not only that, when we start talking about, you also provided some information that said that NIOSH had a published ceiling limit for, that's 15 minutes. Now that OSHA PAL that you see above is an 8-hour TWA, or it's an 8-hour exposure limit. A 15-minute cell means that within 15 minutes, you can't exceed something. 310 ppm is what was provided by y'all, but yet you provided us also the 435 ppm theoretical exposure in that room at that time, and that was 1 hour after the incident. And y'all provided that data. We didn't do that. And it said, and in your data also, the information that you provided, part of the record, you said, regrettably, in early 2022, AIL's Eckert's site-specific incident investigation report stopped conducting the monitoring altogether. And yet in 2023, y'all provided your updated HMPC plan that said other information that I can show you in just a moment. So as we go to, there's some additional information. This is from your safety data sheets you provided. This is the D60, which was changed over in 2017 as a result of a bigger investigation that was done at an inspection that was done. That was changed over. It gave a higher flash point of 147 degrees. That's true. It's a petroleum distillate, and the exposure limit values. This is on the actual, I'm sorry, that's actually on the safety data sheet. And that RCP is a reciprocal calculated number, and it doesn't really apply here. But as you will notice, that's an 8-hour exposure, 184 ppm. You will note that that is lower than what the theoretical numbers that y'all gave us. Now on the SDS, and SDSs can be very, very conservative, and they'll provide that information to the employees just like you do for HASCOM program, right? But it does give some information where it says that this product is a combustible, vapors are flammable and heavier than air, vapors may travel across the ground and reach remote ignition sources, causing a flashback. It just tells you that this is a hazardous material, and it is a hazardous material under our ordinance. As you go into this, there's some physical properties that are really important for this. One is we talk about relative density, which is on the SDS. 0.79 means that this is lighter than water, which means it does float, right? On the vapor density, it means it's much heavier than air. At 5.4, it's 5.4 times heavier than air. That means that this material, vapors sink, they pool, they accumulate. It increases the fire risk dramatically. Exposures can remain higher even after normal ventilation. Vapors can linger in low areas along the even after the source is removed, and people working near the floor are a higher risk. I mean, that's if you're down the floor cleaning up, doing whatever, there's a bigger risk. Excuse me. Now, one of the things that that Corinne talked about was their employee was very experienced. He was a supervisor, but if you take a look, this is their flow chart essentially for things that they have to do to assess a situation, right? This comes right out of their HMPC plan. And if I go down here, this one gets to a point right here where there's an imminent danger, and that's either to employees or the facility. You have to call 911 immediately. Now, under the way that we assess it, we did feel like there was an immediate danger based on the information that we had initially, and that's why we said 911 should have been called. When you get to the next, now there's not only just one page that the supervisor had to go through and address, there's another page. And then you get down to this point, and that you would get down to this point where it actually says in this area right here, it says that you either have to if there's 50% LEL, we're going to not pay attention to that. But it says if the VOCs are over 100, you will, right? You will monitor and you will not go back in. So if you monitor it at 100, if you monitor it at 100 ppm, you're not supposed to be in there. You're supposed to stay out, ventilate the area, and go in later. You don't have that information because you don't have a meter there. And we're not talking about we're talking about even the theoretical things that you gave me were close to 100 anyway, some of them. So now we're talking about a situation where you cannot accurately assess that. So as we get to this, it should have been done. It wasn't done. This is right out of your information. So we get to the next point. This is that theoretically, if you talk about it's 100% distillate, right? If it's 100%, theoretically, if we said it was 435, you could convert that and say VOCs equal whatever that 100% distillate was, meaning that would be 435 ppm. It's a little different because this, out of their HMPC plans, shows aluminum at 20% of that product and 80% mineral spirits. And that's fine. We still know that at 80% mineral spirits, you're still at a theoretical of 435, which I think is understated, ppm. That would still be more than the 100 ppm, where they should have backed out, stayed out until it was 100 ppm. And then finally, based on our review, there was an imminent threat. Based on our review, there was a release to environment because we think that if that gets into your cooling system tower, that possibly could have gotten to the outfall, which y'all may not have known about, or because you do have blow down that goes there, depending on whatever's in the sump at the cooling tower that discharges to us, then that means that it could have discharged without you even knowing about it. And then finally, that you failed to follow the HMPC plan. You did not do according to your emergency operation procedures. You were in violation of the HMO.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now take questions from the board members to MSD. And Mr. Moore, you're still sharing if that was your intent.
Okay, it is not. I'm sorry. I need to get, where is that?
Presentation is gone, but you're still sharing.
How do I get back?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, you feel free to come off of mute and ask any questions of MSD.
Sorry, I wanted to look at one of the regulations real quick, if I can have a few minutes.
Okay.
I did have a question. Can you hear me okay? So the event occurred at 2:50 a.m. and I'm correct in the reading that it was actually discovered by MSD in relation to another event or another visit? Or is that correct?
You are correct. So there was an incident of where they were actually, I think, cleaning up from that. There was I think a leak from a vehicle, or and as a result of a second event. And then I think while the fire department was there and we were there looking, that discovered that this event wasn't reported. And then we asked for a preliminary response report. And based on that preliminary response report, we felt there was a violation, that they should have reported that initial event. So here's the part, and just part of this is that we want everything to be safe for everybody, the general public, the workers, and everybody. Without reporting an event like this, and we went through this, we feel like there is a concern. There is a concern. We're awful conscious of transparency now, And whenever you have an event like this, where there's this many questions to it, it's a real, and again, you have 15 minutes to make all of these determinations that the facility might not have been as transparent as they should have been. And that you can't, it would be very difficult. I have over 30 years of experience doing emergency response. I would have been, honestly, I would have called 911. I mean, honestly. And that's my personal, I don't have the on-site experience at Eckerd, but I have an awful lot of experience that piqued my, why wasn't 911 called? And after we go through all of the questions that we had, we still feel that 911 should have been called.
I apologize. I mean, I thought the purpose of this was to go through facts in the HMO on the record and not, anyone's personal opinion about whether or not 911.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. You're right. I'm sorry.
There are people that work at Eckerd and at other facilities in Louisville that have decades of experience in determining whether they are supposed to report.
You're right.
Similar events, and that's what these people's full-time jobs are at these facilities, and they rely on consultants to assist them with those requirements.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, any other board members have any other questions for MSD? I know, Ms. Carson, you were looking for some regulations. Okay.
I did. I was just trying to understand how so was the procedure that was cited that Mr. Moore said was not followed, was that in the HMPC plan specifically, or was that furnished later as part of a request for information?
That was in a 2020, the 2023 plan was the one that we used, that we had, that was supposed to be current and up to date. There was another plan that was submitted after this incident, and it does have the requirement for monitoring in it also.
Okay.
In the HMPC plan. Yes.
Eckerd believes it followed the 2023 plan.
And then I did have one question in relation to earlier comments in level 0. That's the status, or from what I understand for hazardous materials incidents, that is the level of response needed?
No, so the levels are as they're designated. It's really based on the fire department, what they want to declare during an incident, and level 0 is absolutely correct. That is not something that you typically use in hazardous materials responses, right? But part of it is the reason that we have that is for the general public, not for emergency responders, but for the general public to understand that there wasn't any resources required or requested to respond to that incident, right? So that means that we were there, we went someplace, there was no level. That means that no additional personnel were responded. So if a level 1 is initiated by a fire department, MSD goes. We respond to that, right? At a level at that for the general public, this was our attempt at being more transparent, providing more information to the general public, and we didn't want to make something that really wasn't a level 1 response that required required the resources and the cleanup and everything else, but we wanted to document it so that people would know that yes, there was an incident, but it was not a level 1 or level 2 or level 3.
Okay.
Any other questions for MSD?
If I could, Kelly, just correct one fact on the record. The cooling tower is it does discharge. It's a batch discharge process and not a continuous discharge process. And so we do not have any evidence to believe that any slurry that may have gone into the cooling tower sump was ever discharged into any MSD asset or the outfall one, because the discharge was not open at that time.
And if it does, it discharges from below the surface, not at the surface where the skim was.
Our assessment of that is that is a potential source for it to go from, and that would be environment, from blow down to our discharge outfall. There is a potential. You know, at the moment, you don't know how much got in there. You don't know. You had to go through and you had to clean it out after the fact. The fact is that if there was blowdown from your system into a sump, that sump could discharge to MSD. That is a source to go to the environment or to our outfall. And it is in the environment. If it goes to that sump outside of that containment area, that is the environment.
Ms. Carson?
Yes, one more question about the exposure data. So I'm just confused about the calculated exposure data that was something like 400 parts per million that was above the STEL. How was that calculated by Eckert, or was that calculated by MSD?
By Eckert. They provided that information to us because we were concerned about what they didn't have any way of quantifying what the actual exposure to the workers were. And there would have been an exposure for sure. They did not quantify it. So we asked, and the only way to really do that is to do a calculated. Industrial hygienists can do that. You can calculate it, but there's a lot of problems with doing calculations. I mean, do you take account for everything in the room? Do you know as we know, this material can collect and be more concentrated in some areas than others. It is just a calculated value, but that calculated value was quite high compared to the values that they gave us that can't be used, because if you're going to use a value and say that, well, it would have to be the exact same situation and room and everything else for it to be usable data. It isn't usable data. It does give you some information. The only way typically you use data like that is for and you know this from working in an environment, we have the same process. It's the same thing going on time. We take and we put something on a worker that's going to be working in their breathing zone, and you take that for days or whatever, and okay, if nothing changes in that process, then we can use that as a potential occupational exposure. But if any processes change in that area, you're back to square one. You're going to have to go back and evaluate that and do things again. This was an attempt to come up with a value, and that value, although it was 435 ppm, that's not close to what they provided us as actual. And then in addition to that, based on even the stale and stuff that is not probably the best, but it would still be over that. So that means that worker really can't work in there 15 minutes. The problem is that worker really cannot assess that. That worker doesn't have those values. It's very difficult. I'm just saying that without knowing all of that information, if it was 150 gallons, it was 300 gallons. If it was 10 gallons, 10 gallons maybe, but this was 150 gallons. It took up 15% of the ability, or 14% of the actual containment capability of that area and stuff. So really don't know what that value was, but it was calculated by Eckert, not by MSD.
All right, one more question.
Ms. Carson, if I could just respond, that was a worst case scenario calculation for Eckerd. It did not take into account any credit for reductions in emission levels from the ventilation in the room. And clearly the historical data that we also provided to MSD show that that worst case scenario calculation was an overestimate.
But that was also stated that that was 1 hour after the incident, or 1 hour after the incident. So
One more question, Mr. Moore. What data would have sufficed if they had a meter at the time of the incident? Is that what you were hoping to see?
yeah, I mean, based on their emergency operations procedures, the 100 VOC ppm that was in their emergency response operations procedures, that would have been acceptable to us.
Okay.
And I would just add, Ms. Carson, that, failure of Eckerd to follow its own procedures in this case does not mean that it violated the ordinance.
That is a violation of the ordinance. It's a requirement, yes, that you follow your HMPC plan.
If there was an imminent threat.
No, you're required to follow your HMPC plan.
Okay. Any other questions from the board members to MSD? Seeing none, board members will now exit the Zoom, enter into the other link that you have for deliberation. Chair Mendel, uh-oh, did she leave already? Did she go? I don't see her on the screen anymore.
Yeah, it looks like she's gone.
Okay, I need her to come back, actually.
Okay, let me exit and I'll ask her to come back.
Okay, thank you.
So that they would join the Teams meeting?
They do, but they have to
Oh, go into closed session, sorry.
correct. I was gonna give the process a little bit when she.
So do you want us to leave now or wait?
Nope, please wait. Please wait. Sorry for the confusion.
All right. Unfortunately, I can't get in because it says the meeting will, you'll be allowed in once the meeting starts. So she may be in the same, waiting room that I'm in.
Okay. How many members do we have? So we're still.
Kelly, we'll have
Mhm.
someone start that. I think the person in IT that set it up, so hopefully you can determine if she's in there. Sorry for the bounce back.
Sorry for the confusion. I was trying to give a bit of instruction and process, and I probably started that off wrong.
So Connie just texted me and said, "Are you also waiting to be led in the meeting?" So she's
Can you
in the
tell her to
meeting.
come back to Zoom?
I sure will.
Thank you. Chair Mendel, I apologize for the confusion. We're going to, what I'm gonna need you to do is to ask for a motion to go into closed session and have that, you all need to vote to do that. While they're doing that, I'm gonna ask PC support if they can go ahead and start the other meeting so that we can clearly exit Zoom and get into the other link. Okay.
Okay. Sorry. My apologies for jumping the gun. I guess I'll entertain a motion to move into closed session.
Also move.
Thank you. Do we have a second? I think Lori Carson, did you say yes?
A second, yes.
Thank you.
I do have a
Any
little bit of
objection?
discussion.
Oh.
Real quick question. How will we come back to the Zoom? Are we going to just go back through the link, or are we, what's that look like before we all leave?
Yes, you'll just re-click the Zoom meeting.
Sorry, yes,
as you
yes,
did.
you'll go back to the.
The rest of us will stay on here, so
Make sure.
we'll be here to let you in.
Okay.
So the Eckert team will just stay on the Zoom and wait for
Yes.
your return.
Yes.
So the MSD team will as well.
So another clarification, while in the Zoom, do we then have to vote to end that closed session and go back to the Zoom?
Yes, when you come out of the other link, you will in closed session and yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, it's different when we're virtual.
Okay.
But yes, that's what we'll do. Any other questions? Okay, Chair.
Okay, so we've had discussion, so I guess all in favor of moving into closed session? Any opposed? Okay, so at this time, the board members will move into closed session.
Yes.
think everyone has returned. I'm not seeing Jason Lyman yet.
I don't see Chief Myman.
Agreed. Give it another minute. Here we go. Okay. Okay, the board has reached a decision. And having reviewed the record on appeal and considered the presentations
Chair
presented.
Mendel, you need to come out of
I'm
closed
sorry.
session.
Oh, I'm sorry. First, do I have a motion to come out of closed session?
Motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, everyone in agreement, say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, all right. So we are back in open session, ended closed session. Okay. So the board, having reviewed the record on appeal and considered the presentations presented at today's January 22nd, 2026 board meeting, the Appeals and Overseer Board makes the following recommendations pursuant to Louisville Metro Ordinance number 95.13B and that agency's action B. So the board has voted to uphold the NOV and also modify to include violations of 95.07 Part L, Subpart 2, which is following HMPC plan procedures. I think that concludes the new business section for today. The next thing on the agenda is a proposed date of the next meeting. Robert, do you have a proposed date for our next meeting following in our reoccurring meeting calendar?
He put in the chat that he does not as of now.
Check the calendar. Okay. So typically that our next meeting would be April. The fourth Thursday would be the 23rd. At 2 p.m. via Zoom. So information will be shared later on. You'll receive that via email to ensure that we're able to obtain a quorum for the April 23rd meeting. At this time, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Thank you. Any more? A second?
Second.
Thank you, Carson. Okay, everyone in favor of adjourning? Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your time, for the presentations presented today. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.